Welcome back to Sex and Space, where we explore sex across all of its infinite dimensions. Today we're joined by Daniel Principe, a youth advocate and educator in Australia. He champions boys to challenge culture, partnering with schools and communities to encourage young people to recognise and resist distorted attitudes towards sex, bodies and relationships. He encourages them to aspire instead to healthy relationships based on mutual trust. Let's get into the episode.
Daniel Principe, welcome to Sex and Space. Thank you very much for lending us your valuable time. Very nice to have you on.
It's great to be on Sex and Space. I'm sure my new listeners who are going to dial in are going to ask, what's this all about?
Well, here at Sex and Space, it's all about creating space for talking about sex. We thought our name was so clever. If you wouldn't mind, for people that haven't stumbled across yourself before, you're a youth advocate and educator, but yeah, man, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, that's the title. I guess what I do is I travel around yapping a lot, talking predominantly to young men, but those that care for them, but any audience really, and just asking some questions about what we've learnt about ourselves, about stereotypes, about masculinity, sex, consent, respect, violence from the culture around us, from our upbringing at home, through TV, advertising, gaming, meme culture, porn culture. Have we learnt healthy things? Have we learnt harmful things? Is it equipping us to have a healthy sense of self and to show up as our best in all sorts of relationships, romantic or otherwise, irrespective of someone's particular romantic or sexual interests? And I do that all through a bit of the science, mostly storytelling, my own story, and then inviting other people to lean in authentically with theirs. And for me, it's an absolute honor and privilege to be entrusted to do this work because, you can get a little bit of pushback and fair enough. It's like, why is this guy going around talking to young people about sex and porn? Like, who is this weirdo? Great question to ask. Like, we should be interested in, wanting to make sure we are doing these conversations well, that we're doing them in a way that, or having them in a way that are constructive, that are helpful, that are informed by research, but also listening to young people. And that's probably something that I hope to bring, and as part of the brand that I want to bring to this is listening to the stories of thousands of young people in my time doing this work and hearing what it's like for them and doing my best as an adult to imagine what would it be like going through puberty and adolescence right now in 2024, because it was hard for me. I've asked all my adult audiences, put your hand up if you had a great time in puberty adolescence, you just thought it was so easy and amazing, and of course no one says it was great, and then I say, well, imagine doing that, going through that with like 4 major social experiments now as like normative. So like smartphones, social media, porn tube sites at a click of a button, and now AI. Like, imagine having that as the context and people telling you, make good decisions, don't be a bad human. It's like, well, of course we don't want people to make bad decisions or be disrespectful, but how about we just like go and try and as best as we can to sit in that space with young people and ask them what it's actually like and how they're finding growing up in 2024 and what we could be doing to actually help them. And not that we've got all the answers, because I certainly haven't lived through puberty in the world of AI. So but that's the stuff that I want to be doing. The conversations I want to be a part of is like putting that on the table and just asking some really gentle, curious questions that can hopefully get all people, young and older, thinking about this. And I guess for me, rather than coming away with these kinds of exact facts or stats, it's like I actually want people to come away hopefully having listened and empathize with one another, with themselves, and kind of humanize themselves and one another in that experience. Because I don't think it should be too controversial to say that like the screen and so much of how we encounter one another and the other on screens is quite dehumanizing. Just it trends that way. I'm not saying it's all bad. I love my phone. I love Instagram. But I think if we're not careful, it will trend that way subtly. So how do we rehumanize ourselves in a world of screens and socials that aren't going away and can be a tool for good?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I guess I hadn't really thought of it like that you're creating these spaces for these young kids to learn from each other, empathize with each other. As I say, it's a very effective tool, I imagine, to then having someone just come in and talk to them. It was a nice quote, actually. Championing boys into becoming good men. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit? And is that, derived from your own personal experience and the main aim of what you try to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. My mission is champion boys, challenge culture. And I want to champion all people. It just so happens that I think encouraging, equipping boys right now, I think, is the most pressing social issue we have. And different people have different takes on that, different political takes. And, at the end of the day, if boys are healthy, if they are secure in themselves, if they can give and receive care, if they know how to give and receive empathy, if they can be grounded, have an identity, have some growing purpose, like that will radically change the world.
Around that purpose and the values, what are some tools that you use to sort of help them clarify that? I mean, and actually understand that and be able to work that out for themselves.
Totally. It's giving them the space and to go back to like that distinction of challenging culture, because I think so many boys, and they just hear it all the time, is like they hear it, they're bad. Now, whether that's truly what's being communicated, I know because they tell me that's how they perceive things. They feel that there's only negative news stories. They don't hear good stories of young teenage men being decent, being upstanders. They just kind of feel like they're just waiting for another person to tell them off just for being boys. Now, I'm all for accountability. I wouldn't be an advocate if I wasn't, and justice, and I'm all for challenging things that are harmful and people taking ownership of that. However, if you walk into a room of people and you know none of their stories, you know nothing about their lives up until that point that you've walked into the room, you can't start with the premise that they are all X, Y, Z, whether good nor bad. It's just like you're just humans sitting there, and my job is to give you an opportunity to consider how you have constructed some of your identity, your masculinity, how you want to show up in this life, because I'm on that journey and I certainly haven't arrived. So I'm going to invite you to see my own struggles, my own challenges, the things that I've navigated from a lot of bullying as a young person, and then invite them to consider that for themselves. And whether you look at, obviously here in Australia, we've got the Man Box research unpacking what it means to be a man in Australia and some of the messages that boys are getting and feeling pressure to conform to. Or you've got sociologist Michael Kimmel in the US, who's obviously done a lot of work in this space and has been a forerunner, is looking at some of these messages that boys have received. Jackson Katz being another one who came out and toured Australia recently, looking at, well, what are the ideas about masculinity that we've adopted from around us, and are they actually serving us? And that's the conversation I want boys to have. Is, for me, I don't want to get so prescriptive into like this is what it should exactly look like, and that's where I kind of default more to character and virtues, because they're timeless. Because if you're loving, courageous, respectful, just, kind, empathetic, that's going to set you up in life no matter who you are. Like, that's going to go well for you. Unpacking what that actually looks like when you say to boys, like, what does respect mean? What does that look like? How do you get respect? How does a man get respect? How does a woman get respect? Like, they're the conversations that I find really interesting to lean into. And I guess for me, it's wanting to put at least a bit of a motivating vision for boys to think about the kinds of young men that they want to be and how they want to show up for themselves, for their mates, and for other people, like irrespective of whatever careers or material success they may experience in life. Like, how would you want your reputation to be? Like, do you want to be that guy that when he rocks up to a party, everyone gets the ick? Or are you the guy that actually puts people at ease? Like, are the women and girls in your life, do they feel safe around you? And I guess I'm trying to champion that, because they're going to get lots of messages about how to make money, drive a fast car, and pick up whoever, they want sexually. I want to ask them, like, do you have aspirations that when you enter a room, people are at ease because here's a decent, respectful, safe man with empathy who can listen? Mm-hmm. And how do we champion that? How do we celebrate that? But how do we also model that for you and give you the tools to be that? And that's probably where I want to see the shift is like, I think we demand a lot of respect from young people and young boys. And I think it's about like actually modeling it and showing them that as well. So that's a big part of, I guess, the conversations and what I'm trying to get them to consider for themselves. And I guess I get them to do that by having a moment of self-reflection. And I tell them like, no one's going to read this, whether they write it on their phone, whether they write it on a computer or a piece of paper, like, because I want to disarm the worry that they may have that is someone going to ask me to read this, you know, in front of the whole group. And so I affirm to them, no, this is just between you and your conscience. But I want you to think about how you want to show up today. And then at the end, I ask them, how do they want to show up for the week ahead and for their life and how that would make them feel about themselves. And that for me is such a beautiful anchoring point. And some of them have chosen to share. And they write really beautiful things. Like they're like, I want to be honest. I want to be authentic. I want to be brave. You know, I want to take responsibility. And so you're like, okay, that's actually there. The hard part is we know amongst boy culture and male culture, we'll shame that if that's what kind of they say they want for themselves. But I at least want them to take a moment where between themselves and their own conscience, they've gone, actually, that would be great. That would look good on me. And I would feel good being that guy.
It's very interesting to give them that time and space to step back and do that kind of internal work. Because I imagine that a lot of, and from my own personal experience, a lot of what you think you want comes from role models, comes from your peers, you know, and it can get very you can get a bit lost. So
and I think it clouds it, and I think, you know, for me it's a major lens, and this would be a huge philosophical conversation, is I'm really fascinated with desire. Why do we want what we want? Is it innate? Is it socialized? You know, and there's obviously so many different things that contribute to it, from different traumas to, you know, our attachment style growing up. Like there's so much that's going to shape this, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I am fascinated by, especially like mimesis, like what people around us model, how they act, and how we actually unconsciously copy that. I mean, have you ever seen people going out together and like you'll see a group of friends, guys or girls, and they're all dressed similarly?
Oh yeah.
You know, and it's like, I'm always curious. I always want to go up to them, never to shame them, but I'm just so curious. Are you guys aware that you're all dressed like really, really similarly? Like, good on you. Like, but it's just so fascinating. And I'm like, I think for all of us, like, do we actually authentically want these things? And how do we know? And I'm certainly not going to suggest I know, but I know for me personally, I can't speak to others, is it's like, what other people have said that you should like, or this is what you should do. Like, take drinking. Have I ever liked drinking? No, but that's what guys were doing in my late teens, and that's what you were expected to do. Did I actually sit there going, do you know what I want to do tonight is drink this $20 cheap vodka at the time? Like, that's what it was. You know, like, no. Did I want that? Not really. No, but I did it. You know, and so I'm really fascinated by that. And same with guys in terms of, you know, what kind of sports they feel they have to do or careers they have to do and step into, if there are both these spoken and unspoken rules that are there. And so I am fascinated with desire, and I'm really fascinated by like social media and sexual media, as you know, in terms of shaping desire. And again, it's not to say to someone, this is what it ought to be for you, but certainly to say, could we just ask some really graciously curious questions about, why maybe we want that and why maybe we want to do that or have that?
Well, I think that's what's so interesting, is to actually stop what is probably instinctive, probably a lot around, you know, social safety and fitting in and not being, you know, some outlier in, say, your school peers or, you know, whatever it might be. But to actually, like you said with the drinking example, stop and think, is this actually what I want to do? Or am I just doing it, you know?
Something I would like to ask in relation to that is like, because I think it's one thing, to know that that's, maybe that doesn't match your desire. But then I think because social pressure is so intense that sometimes you can recognize that that's not what you want and you do it anyway. And so if there was someone listening who's going, I recognize that I'm doing things I don't want to do, but I don't know how to stop doing them, what message would you have for those people?
I think it's really brave to even just acknowledge that and to sit with that. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we all face in life is those social pressures. And one of the things that I say to young people, and this may help someone, is it's why you need to choose your friends well. Because, that is what makes it so hard to resist anything, is because if you feel like you are going to be the outlier in your friendship group. Now, I was always someone who liked to be a bit contrarian, so that didn't bother me. I was too busy listening to my emo music and kind of wanting to rebel at one point from what was mainstream. But I don't think most people are wired that way. And of course, right now, I want the affirmation of those that I love and know and care for me. And so I think, it is so important to acknowledge that, to sit with that. And I think there is a sense of weighing, like, what does that cost you in terms of your own inauthenticity and being able to actually be loved and known by your friends, like be accepted for who you are and what you like. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's what allows for true diversity. But I think if it's to the point where it is so difficult, like, it's hard to say this, but it's the truth. And I've just had to step away from people in life. And sometimes you give that a breather, and there's people I've reconciled with afterwards. And it's not like we had a falling out, but it's like, then our relationship could actually be authentic. Like, you get to be you, I get to be me. But then there are some people where just naturally that drops off. And I think for me, perhaps because it's just happened more readily for me because I've traveled a lot and lived in different cities, I'm kind of used to the fact that, you just evolve, you just grow, you just shift, and that's okay. And sometimes people are in different life stages. So it's very difficult, but I think that's what makes it easier. Otherwise, we're doing life in like ultra hard mode. Like, either get friends that accept you or you might have to look at who you give that time to, which I'm not saying is easy, but then the cost is like, you don't get to be you. You don't actually get to authentically be you. And, like, we all do different things for our friends. Like, I've gone to gigs that I wasn't keen on, but my friend wanted to go. But it's like, it's just allowing for that difference and to actually say, I'm going to come, but maybe I don't want to drink, and allowing for that. But I think, that peer pressure is so difficult. And I think it's so like this unspoken. Like, I saw some research that I was reading in a book about like college. I think it was Jean Twenge and iGen. She quoted like these college students, and they all felt that they had to tell their mates that they really wanted to go up and hook up and do all these kind of, things. And when she actually interviewed them by themselves, what they actually said was, I just actually want to find like a long-term stable relationship. And again, not all, it's not, not for everybody, but it was just this idea of college culture says, I got to be up for like going out, hooking up, doing all this. But then actually this is what they want, but they were too afraid to say it. And I think there's so many instances of that. We even see this now with people's sexual encounters where guys and girls in that heterosexual context are thinking, this is what I need to do. And the guy's like, well, I want to do this, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable doing this. But then they both end up doing something that neither of them actually wants, but they've felt like there's this unspoken pressure to do that.
I'm interested to... obviously, like, we're all older and smellier and wiser than some of the kids that you're talking to. But how do they respond when you present this or sort of lay out, just because it really resonates with me?
Let me vouch for them, honestly. So what blows me away about Gen Z is their insight and their ability to integrate all this information. Like that, I think they just do superbly well. Like, I have year sevens put their hand up and I'll ask them to analyze an image because I do a lot of critical media literacy. And I'll have a year seven boy put his hand up and say, sir, that's objectification. And I'm like, how on earth did you know what that word was? Like, I didn't know that until university. Like, Just extraordinary. Like, so those sorts of things I routinely see their incredible ability to analyze like pretty mature content. Like, I've been blown away by that. And some of my recent podcasts, I've really been sharing about how I've been having to kind of give year 8 and 9s more mature workshops and more mature questions to think on, because they've just excelled in the analytical components of all of this and really being able to think through it. And so what I'm seeing is such an appetite for them to engage with these ideas. And I think, again, creating the space where it is safe to do so. Sometimes you get, very rarely, where boys will kind of shame one another for speaking up and offering great insights. And it's obviously my job to facilitate what we do and don't want in the space. But I see such an appetite for them, and I think like making it fun. So we analyze like mainstream pop culture portrayals of men and women, and that's really interesting. And you get to see their insights as I'm trying to get them to think through like what's being portrayed here. And they'll say, you know, like, the men have got more power. And I'm like, but why? Like, what is it about these images that portray that? Because that's interesting that that's the meaning you've attached to this image, but tell me more. And so I love having those conversations with young people, and it blows me away what they come up with and what they're prepared to share in that space. And we start with insights, and then we build to empathy and sharing stories and asking them to tell me not just analytical information, but I ask them, if you're this person in this story, how are you feeling? And I love then getting them that opportunity to sit there, and I don't stop that moment until we've exhausted all feelings, all descriptive words of emotion in this space, and affirming that and normalizing that and then sitting with it. And again, that's there. I don't create that. The teachers don't create that. Like, that's there, and it's just there to be, I guess, unearthed and celebrated and brought to the surface. And then the final piece for me is courage. That's the hardest part, because it harks back to our last chat about peer pressure, social expectations. So they can know this in their hearts and minds, but it's like, how am I going to live this out? Once we leave this room, because in this room now we've created this culture of celebrating the best of young men and young people, celebrating respectful relationships and consent and empathy. But now we're going to leave this room and we're going to go onto the school bus or go into the next classroom or go into the footy field or log on online, group chat, gaming chat. And there doesn't necessarily have that same culture. And will we have the courage to live out what we know deep down and what's right for us? And for me, I think that's actually the hardest piece, for all the reasons we've obviously already touched on. So I never doubt their insights and their empathy. It's just that last piece of how do we do that? And my thing, and that's why I say let's challenge culture, because I think we make it too darn hard for all of us to show up as our best because of these peer pressures, because of the messages that we are imbibing from mainstream culture all around us. And so for me, it's like, how do we curate our online spaces, choose our friends well, you know, and get up to things that are good for us and be around people that celebrate the right things to make that an easier proposition. Because I think otherwise we're expecting so much from 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds to show this courage, to be upstanders, to push back against their mates and against mainstream culture. Like, that's such a tough thing for young people. And that's why I think, you know, for me, that's the advocacy component. We actually have to make the world a healthier place so young people can flourish, and 13-year-old girls don't need to show, you know, absurd amounts of resilience just to get through a school day without being hated on for their bodies and shamed and harassed. Like, they shouldn't have to navigate that. And so, yeah, that's my kind of take on where young people are at. And so I see so much potential for good. I just think we just have to be able to have more of these conversations that, of course, tell them the laws, give them the facts, give them the figures. But I think if we don't actually engage their hearts and then give them opportunities to affirm that amongst their peers, we're probably not going to see that transformation. And it's obviously going to happen at home, at school, amongst their mates, and whatever community spaces that they occupy that are also reinforcing those same messages.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? With the digital world that we live in, I read a piece that you wrote where, you know, you you talked about growing up with a Nokia 3210 and playing Snake and stuff like that. I mean, it sounds very similar to me, but I do see that, yeah, it's a big ask, right? Because you're there for an afternoon.
That's right.
And then they're straight back into the smartphone, social media, and all that kind of stuff. And just in terms of pushback, like, do they feel like you're taking anything away from them by showing them this information or asking them to do something kind of radical?
Yeah, I've never kind of quite had that. Maybe it's because it seems so countercultural to where they're at. Because again, they've not known anything other than smartphones. Whereas you and I have both known the world prior to a smartphone and what it was like to just wait for a bus or, just sit around, walking around the shops. So yeah. I guess I don't get too much pushback from young people. I think it's harder for parents because we've all given our young people internet-enabled devices. And of course, as I have to remind everyone, if you've given them that, then they've got access to the internet and the internet's got access to them. And that's just the way it is, gang. And I know that's a frightening thought, but that is reality because here I am, every school I go to, I get a brief on how many boys have been sextorted, how many of them have been catfished, that they know of, let alone the other ones trying to argue with some predator to get their nudes back at 3 o'clock in the morning. And believe me, I've heard those stories time and time again. And so that's for that's the older boys experiencing that, 13 to 17. And so that is the world. So I think it's harder in some ways for both education systems where we've given devices to young kids. And again, I'm not saying take them away. I'm just saying we have to do something better to help young people because it's an unfair fight. We've got trillion and billion dollar industries whose whole business model is to try and keep all of us glued to these screens as long as possible. I'm not one of those get rid of the phone. I love my phone. It has enabled me to connect with incredible humans and do so much through spaces just like this, but I have thankfully now a fully developed frontal lobe and it's like that's not the same for a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old. And so what are those boundaries? Just like we all need them, like we all need trainer wheels for different things in life. And what does that look like for the smartphone device? And how do we do that? Because let's be honest, if I'm not careful, I'll go to respond to a message on my phone and next minute I'm scrolling on cat reels on Instagram. And it's like, how did that happen? And I'm meant to be more conscious of that. So again, there's no superheroes in this place. This is me too. Like I'm navigating it. But I'm saying, gosh, we should be helping young people with that. So for them, not so much. I think it's the adults thinking both policy, family dynamics, school systems, like how do we actually navigate that well and see a bit of, I guess I would just call it respite for young people to just have some time off their devices. For all these reasons. And I guess, to point back, it's like, we can do so much in a day, in a 90-minute session, and you can do the best 10 out of 10 session in the world. But they do go back onto their devices and they are exposed to all sorts of things that undermine the messages. And as has been done in all sorts of research, if you put your age profile as a young man as from a blank profile onto social media, YouTube, like eventually you will go down some rabbit hole algorithms, just that's naturally fed to you. And so we have to ask, is this a fair fight? And of course, I've made the case it's not. So what does it look like for big tech to be held to account? Because you can have the best kid with the best parents, if that exists, living behind their best white picket fence, but the internet doesn't care. And we have to find ways to equip young people. And I have high expectations every time I meet with young people. Any postcode here in Australia, I just know, as I said, I'm going to see those insights and that empathy and that growing courage. But we have made it an unfair fight. And I'm all for holding individuals to account, but I think there hasn't been enough of a cross-cultural analysis to say, well, what kind of results are we expecting if young boys especially are fed a diet of violent porn and Andrew Tate videos and other worse kind of bad faith actors online, and group chats in gaming that obviously reward the most racist, violent, hectic, kind of degrading commentary, because that's what gets laughs. And the same with reels on Instagram. That's what gets eyes on, how are we expecting that to, unfold for them? And it's not to give them a pass and say, well, it's fine because that's your culture, like, so be it. But it's to say, hey, if we don't do something radically about that, you could have the best consent, respectful relationships program in the world. But that is a counter education. And what do we do to at least limit that to some extent? And there's responsibility from government right down to the individual, including family, schools, community, advocacy groups that all play a piece in it all. But I say that to say it's unfair, not to put in the towel, throw in the towel, but to say it's an unfair fight, but we all have to play a role, and we have to start with empathy for young people, because they didn't create all of this, but they are navigating it, and obviously not always navigating it well. So let's actually help them and inform them and give them the tools to step back and think about this. And I guess that's back to your question. That's the part that they're actually so grateful for.
Yeah.
Because they've not necessarily had opportunities to analyze culture for themselves and to think about, well, is this serving me?
That's true, and really interesting that you say that they're grateful for it. I mean, one of my questions is why certain things really resonate with certain groups. Andrew Tate, for instance. What gap is he filling, or why is he resonating, in certain communities, and why is that such an attractive sort of message? Yeah,
it's such a good question to ask. And I think what's really good to be clear on is that I think the percentage of boys who actually really like and idolize him is smaller than what we realize. I think there's a lot that engage with it because it's a bit of banter, how to stir up mum, how to stir up my teacher, how to stir up my female friends. I think that probably is a larger body of boys. I don't have the facts for it, except for now some recent research, which I'll touch on in a moment. And I actually think there's still a significant portion that are pretty critical of him. I don't have hard data because I don't have the luxury to pay an evaluation team, and I'm not funded by the government to do this work. But I've asked boys, who thinks he's a good role model, who thinks he's a bad role model. And it's 50-50, but that was 18 months ago in the height of Tateism, or 12 months ago. And the latest research here in Australia from the eSafety Commissioner, looking at young men's experiences of online world, showed that they are actually quite critical of Andrew Tate. Like, it's not all like, oh my gosh, he's amazing. And same with their views on pornography and gaming. Like, again, those insights are there. They realize that things are harmful. And like with all of us, we can know what's best and beneficial and healthiest for us. Doesn't mean we always do that. In every area of our life. Like, let's be honest, I don't always get good sleep hygiene and get off my phone and go and have a good 8 hours sleep. I do not, but I know that's good for me. Yeah. So same with them. They have all of this available to them, so they can intellectually be critical of something, but that doesn't stop it affecting us and shaping like our desires or what we think we should want or what we think we should be, etc., etc. But for me, I look at what was he speaking to, and again, these kind of influences, and I think there is, a sense of young men being disaffected, feeling left out, feeling like, well, where to from here, and so either they've wanted to backlash or improve themselves. Or you can be passive. Like they're your three options, right? You can either check out or you can improve yourselves, in which case some of these messages resonate with that of like, work hard, be successful, provide, etc., etc. Now, I think other people have said this, and I've jokingly said this many times, like when your mum says it, it's not cool, but when Andrew Tate tells you to go to sleep, drink water and exercise and, work hard, it's like, oh, I'm going to do that. And then I think the more concerning thing for me is those who are turning to these types of bad faith actors who are grooming and exploiting young men. They are for their own gain. But it's those that are going to it to be part of that backlash, to be part of, let's make life uncomfortable for others, let's be hostile, let's be deliberately provocative. I think it's important to make that distinction, and I think they're the ones that we need to be worried about. I think the ones who have seen some of his motivational talk as like helpful, I think they're quite easy to channel. And I've done it personally by saying, well, is there other people who are also giving these quality advice? And I'll say to them, what are you interested in? And if they say like psychology or health or nutrition or exercise, I'm like, well, check out these guys. Or if it's relationship advice, it's like, well, check out this. And so I think they're easier to kind of massage and, hey, put out there and engage. And I always do it graciously curious. I recognize, you know, I have some platform and privilege, which makes it easier for me. I recognize why the average woman would be exhausted and not wanting to have those conversations with the men and boys in their life. I've obviously realized that I have an access to obviously put alternative models out there for them. I think it is the boys who are kind of like, well, to hell with it. This is just a backlash. We want to get back at the world. Like that, for me, is deeply troubling, and I don't have the answers. And I've listened to other incredible thinkers, like here in Australia, Dr. Josh Roos, who looks at, you know, masculinities and terrorism and like radicalization, and I think those seeds are part of that. Like, I'm not saying it's fully what that is, but I think it's on the way to that, because there are some pretty hostile and pretty ugly views that are tied up in all of that. And I think it's a way to cope. I think it's a way to cope and have a sense of power and control in the world. If you feel you've lost that, whether that's a legitimate feeling, whether that's a true observation of reality, I see so much of it as that. And instead of doing something constructive, it's going to that. And another one to speak to in this same context is like, it's a way to cope, right? Like Sigma right now, this Sigma meme, this iconography for this generation of boys, Patrick Bateman, American Psycho, it's the most common word spat out of their mouths. They don't even really know what it means. When I ask them to define it, we get 20 different definitions. And I always say to them, like, surely we should know what a word means if we're going to use it. It now is just equated with cool. One incredible young man in Western Sydney the other day said to me, and he summed it up perfectly. I think I'd been trying to over-explain it, but he just said it perfectly, where he said, it's every unhealthy male stereotype marketed as if it was cool. And I was like, oh, bro, you nailed it. And I asked his teacher to write that down, because I got to use that from here on out. And I look at that in the same context of like the different things we can all go through to cope, to get a sense of control in the world, maybe to backlash against the world because we just don't like our current experience of life. And the Sigma one. So I was in Newcastle recently here in Australia, and I was speaking to some older boys, and that's where I try to probe a little bit more to get to the heart of what's going on. And we were talking about the Sigma meme and where it's come from, and I talk about it in the fact that, isn't it interesting for me, is this like meme art reflecting reality reflecting meme art? Because of course Sigma is this lone wolf recluse, you know, Patrick Bateman, detached from reality. And right now in the Western world, we're in a loneliness epidemic. And so I find it fascinating that the kind of aspirational vision of masculinity being the Sigma trope is the very antithesis of what actually boys need, which is to be in community, to have connection, to have care, to be grounded in reality, and to not be a, you know, murderous sociopath, you know. Hey, who would have thought, you know? So I sit with that and I think, you know, that's a really fascinating dynamic. And I ask the boys, like, what's going on here? Like, tell me, like, I'm curious. And then I just put something out there. I said, like, why do you think this is so popular right now? Like, what do you think this is achieving? And one of the boys said it, and I just loved his authenticity around it. And he goes, well, if you're some guy who's awkward, isn't great at making friends, has no riz, as the kids would say, like doesn't know how to chat to a girl or someone that you're interested in, well, instead of just saying like maybe you're some loser, not that we should call someone that, but, you know, rather than, you know, thinking that's your lot in life, that I'm just this socially awkward loser, I'll call myself a Sigma. And you're like, That's just it. It's like it's to glorify something that you would prefer not to be so. It's like, well, yeah, that sounds way better than being like, I'm socially awkward and I don't know how to make friends and talk to girls. I'll just be some lone wolf recluse and call myself a Sigma. And I just thought that was so prescient, so insightful as to so much of whether it's Tate, whether it's Sigma, because there'll be the next thing, right? Because it's like whatever the next thing is on the horizon, that's, part of the zeitgeist, part of what is going on for boys. That's either, soothing, coddling, it's, coming alongside and comforting some of those dysfunctional or less than ideal. I'm not saying that to judge. I'm just saying to say like, yeah, like it's a cope. And my heart is to actually get in there and find out, like, why are we trying to cope, guys? Like, what are we trying to escape from? Like, what's going there? And is there a way that we could transform that in a healthier way? So rather than defaulting to Tate and Sigma, like, could we actually become young men of those virtuous characteristics that are good for us? And how would that be? And what happens if we gave that a try? There's an idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will, ask a question about porn, because I know that some of the people that we've spoken to, if they try and mention that in schools, it's a bit, of a tricky area because of the age restrictions around porn and porn consumption. So I wondered, how do those conversations go, or are you able to have those kinds of conversations about that while you're doing these talks?
Pretty much, yeah. Year 7 and upwards, and for year 5 and 6s, I won't use the word porn, but might talk about private pictures, private videos. They might use their own language, which you always work with. You work with other people's words and language and concepts of something, and so they might say like inappropriate pictures or things that they know they shouldn't, see, etc., etc. And we just create a non-judgmental space to say, yeah, like that's the world you're growing up in, not your fault, nothing to feel bad about. It's normal to be curious about sex, about bodies, about having desires, being aroused, attracted to people. But you guys are growing up with an industry that's apparently $97 billion, makes up 30% of the internet. That's a pretty unfair fight as you're trying to navigate making healthy decisions. And of course, this is content that's created to seriously spike your interest, because we're hardwired as sexually reproducing creatures. And this is going to give you a nice dopamine spike and a nice state of mental arousal. Like, that's what sex does, and obviously this is a counterfeit version of it. And so I give them that as context to say it's not bad or wrong if you've been exposed, if you're consuming. Like I was exposed at 11 by an older family friend. I've learned in the course of doing this work that that's a crime, it's sexual harassment, and it's actually grooming if you're under 16 and they're over 18. And so a lot of people don't know that. I reckon it's probably one of the most common crimes that it happens. And I'm not really here to talk about the legality of it. I'm more interested in, again, the messages. What is this teaching us? Because it is acting as a default sex educator. So we have to ask the question. And so what is it teaching us about sex, which is no insignificant topic? When we do sex well, it can be so beautiful, pleasurable, mutual, life-giving. And obviously when we get sex wrong, it can be harmful, if not criminal, and traumatizing. So it matters. It matters a lot. And the research here in Australia from some of our academics is that there's, for boys, about a 3-year gap between first exposure to porn and their first sexual experience. So there's a long time to be learning from the porn industry, who, as I say to them, doesn't have their best interests at heart. And I hope this isn't controversial to your listeners. I don't think the porn industry, and producers, especially when we look at, say, Ron Jeremy and Max Hardcore, as the two forerunners in this industry. I don't know if they were waking up every day going, I wonder how I can help equip young people to have healthy sexual experiences based on mutuality, shared pleasure, intimacy, and a real concept of healthy desire and being in tune with the other. Like, no, these guys are quoted trying to degrade women on camera to their breaking point, and that is horrific. I don't like saying that, but it is the damn truth. And if that is actually like what young people are being exposed to, I recognize that not all porn is equal. There is some that is horrific, and some people might argue that there's stuff that's more vanilla. What I'm interested in, though, is irrespective of your starting point, our brain's capacity to adapt and tolerate by desensitization any stimulus that we receive means you need to go and get more of it or more extreme versions of it. And that's what I see in young boys. So when I ask them, when I say, like, if they come afterwards, and I'll have a line of boys disclosing to me that they're struggling with porn, and I ask them, when did you first get exposed? 8, 9, 10, 11. And of course, the average exposure for boys is about 11 here in Australia. And I then ask them, like, and when are you looking? Because I'll talk about me. Like, I would go to it when I was, like, feeling low mood. It wasn't because I was horny. It's usually to soothe and to cope, as you said, Tim. Like, I think that's a huge part of it. I think, you know, yeah, some people might be looking to explore sexual fantasy or whatever, and we can argue the ethics and merits of that. But I'm hearing from young boys, and one time in Melbourne, I think I had a line of 20 boys who literally, I think 95% of them, when I asked them, and, you know, when is it? Like, when do you feel like you want to watch this? I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. It's low mood, and they're looking to cope. And something that you guys may know about this younger generation is they drink less alcohol, they take less drugs, they're more socially conservative in the sense of, like, not in their political ideology, in terms of who they hang out with. They're not as outgoing as previous generations. And so this, therefore, is the simplest, quickest, like, antidote to those low mood feelings. And it's why some people call it the new drug. Some people use an addiction framework. That's contested. I'm okay with that. If a young person uses the addiction word with me, that's how they've made sense of it. So I'll roll with it. Cool. But this is freely accessible, 24/7, doesn't cost them anything, can be consumed anonymously. So if you're feeling low mood and you've got this at a click of a button, it's easier to go and get your dopamine happy hit from looking at new stimulating pornography than to go out and try and get cocaine and ecstasy, right? Like, and there's serious barriers that stop that, both education, legal, and social as well. Whereas the same isn't there, you know, for pornography and consuming it privately. And so it's a very different dynamic. And most young people, although I've seen a huge shift probably over the last 12 to 18 months, most young people said to me they've never heard a talk on just the whole considerations of pornography, impact to self and brain, impact to body image, relationships, sexual expectations, sexual scripts, you know, your partner's experience, consent, and perhaps more broader justice ethics issues. Like, they're like, we've never heard that. And given that we've got 54% of boys consuming porn every single week in Australia and about 18% every single day, 1 to 3% of girls every single day for context, we have to talk about this. Because you could wheel me out every day if you think I do a half decent job to try and give some just facts about all this so they can make an informed decision. But I can't compete with that counter education. And that's what I say to schools, policymakers, is like, you could have, again, the best consent and respectful relationships curriculum in the world, but if 18% of boys are watching porn every single day, I don't know if we can compete with that, because I don't think they're in a state of arousal with the conditioning tool of orgasms when they're in their consent class. And I say that playfully, but if you know, obviously, brain science, that's a powerful conditioning tool in terms of reinforcing our neural pathways and neuroplasticity. And so I look at this and I just want to ask questions, and I'm sure you guys have had it. You've had some great guests on here who would obviously be able to talk about power dynamics, racism, violence, and who is violence directed to in pornography. And there are answers to all of those questions. And just to ask, so what is it teaching us then? And is it going to equip us for a healthy mutual sexual experience where people are clear on what they want, what they don't want, and it's communicated and it's discussed and it unfolds. And I'm kind of the opinion that there is still mystery. You could read every sex book under the sun, you could watch all the porn in the world, but if you are then engaging with a partner, they are a completely unique human creature who has a unique mind, physiology, background of trauma, previous sexual experiences or not. And it's up to you to try and learn about that person. Now, of course, I want you to be educated, but what I'm really interested in this space is, do we have the soft skills to do relationships, romance, and sex well? And those soft skills are beneficial in all areas of society. It's why when some of the all boys schools ask me, Dan, if you had infinite resources, what would you do? I say like soft skills for boys, but we got to package it in a way that they're going to receive it and understand that this is actually beneficial in all domains. Like if you want to be a footy coach, an entrepreneur, whoever, it's like these are going to be beneficial for you. And I think that for me is like, I think we've put too much emphasis on like the nuts and bolts of sex and like the different positions, techniques, and like, hey, cool, like whatever. For me, I'd love a kind of a renaissance of like soft skills, communication, thinking about intimacy and asking these questions so that we can have really good sexual experiences in whatever context that person is choosing that for themselves. And hopefully they are choosing it because they want it, not because of, again, that social conditioning. Because I hear from a lot of young people feeling the pressure to have sex, and like the guys think they've got to, the girls think they've got to, because you're either prudish or you're not man enough, depending on which side of the gender you experience this kind of shaming from. And so yeah, I guess I just want to bring all of that to the light and ask just, again, some questions that it's just about, hey, this was my story. There's others like it. Can I share some other people's stories? And I just love having that opportunity. And I've shared about it a lot of late. But, I asked a group of Year 9 boys in regional Queensland, like, what's missing from pornography? And their answers were just incredible. And that's what I want, because that is that literacy, but it's beyond just saying, oh yeah, I want to challenge these things about porn and porn culture, but to actually imagining what good relationship, sexuality, and healthy masculinity could look like when you've got 14-year-old boys in front of their mates talking about emotional connection, intimacy, romance, love, consent, safety, relationship outside of the bedroom. Like, I'm like, yes, like let's affirm and celebrate all of that. And that's what, like I said, I'm interested in that. Yes, challenging porn, but of course, what is it that we actually want in our relationships and our sexual experiences? And how would we go about equipping one another and young people to have the tools and the communication skills and the EQ, the emotional and relational literacy to do that well?
I did just wonder, what can parents do to sort of step in, upskill?
Yeah. I mean, that's the missing piece. Here in Australia, there's research that about 25% of parents have had these chats with their children, but 75% know that they want to. So again, there's that gap between what we know is good and healthy, but helping them do that. It's why I, after a little bit of interrogation, agreed to be an ambassador for our federal government's Consent Can't Wait campaign. I just made sure that they were happy with what I wanted to say if I was going to get involved. And I was like, I talk about porn, right? And, because, governments play it safe. But I love this campaign, genuinely. Hence, I've decided to be an ambassador for it, because it's all about parents having these conversations with other parents and parents then having these conversations with their young people themselves. And so that's, consent.gov.au here. And it's got some fantastic resources and conversation starters. And so, I think parents know they need to have these conversations, and I've seen a lot of the research that affirms that, but knowing you need to do something and then making it accessible, I think realizing it's teachable moments. It's not this one big, hairy, scary sex talk. It's like we just have teachable moments based on maybe what they see in a TV show or what you hear on the radio or something that happens to a celebrity. Like, that could be a really good conversation starter. Or your young person comes home and says, hey, this happened, AI was used on my friend, or, so-and-so was tricked into sending an image of themselves. Like, these things are happening in all of our schools and postcodes, and all of them would create teachable moments. I think, obviously, above all else, young people need to know that they're parents, because young people want to talk to their parents, and the research shows that, but they're not going to initiate the conversation. But mum and dad, trusted caregiver, is the person they want to go to. That's their number one pick of who they want to go to. And so to just not only communicate that message that at 3:00 in the morning, I am here, like I'm here for you. I want you to be safe. I want you to be healthy. I'm always here. But then also, like, initiating those conversations on a walk, on a drive, maybe over the dinner table, and creating the space for that and those questions to come. And I think, again, being graciously curious. It's like asking them, oh, what made you think of that? Or, you know, like, what are the other kids at school saying? It doesn't always have to be like grilling your little son, Johnny, like, have you watched porn? You know, what do you think about it? But asking it in more broader questions and asking it maybe more of the culture or of their peers. And I think just having those conversations. I think a big thing when I think about culture is like, who are our heroes? What do we celebrate? And what are the stories that we tell? And I think it's really important for parents to think about that in those formative years about, like, who are those role models? Who are those people that we want to celebrate and the traits that we want to celebrate, especially for boys, because I think it's very easy in this culture because they get so many harmful messages to veer off and lose what I think is innate to them, which is their decency, their respect, their desire to be courageous, to be loving, all these sorts of things. That's innate to them. It's innate to every person. And so I think just making sure that is like, what families actually say, and not just say it, but model it. Because we can talk to young people, but then if we see mum and dad not be respectful, and again, not saying that everything's got to be perfect, but how do they resolve conflict? Do they acknowledge it? Do they apologize? Do they actually say, do you know what? I could have handled that better. Yeah, I think all of that helps in creating, positive understandings of respect, interpersonal skills, EQ. That is so far from the bedroom, you know, but it's like it all influences how we experience ourselves in those spaces. And I think for me, there is just, such a desire in young people for these conversations. And it's also not just on one or two parents. It does take the proverbial village, and there is roles for everybody to come alongside and have these conversations. I think parents should do all they can to think about healthy boundaries that are agreed upon between them and their young people, certainly before you've given them any devices and certainly before any phones. I think once the genie's out of the bottle, it's a bit hard to put it back, but you can and should and ought to put boundaries in place. And I think just model it, you know, do families have a day off screens where they actually just go and spend time together? You know, what's the rules around the dinner table? Do we all put phones away and actually say, no, we're going to be present, have conversations and actually check in? Because again, we can lament, young people spending too much time on their phones. But we can whinge about that, or we can actually create opportunities where, no, we say we're all getting together. It could be cheeseburgers or it could be a sit-down roast, like whatever. But we're at the table, we're hanging out, we're talking. Yeah. So I just think there's no one silver bullet, but I think we can pick a few little things that we want to champion. And as I always say to my audiences, pick a couple of things you want to champion, a couple of things you want to challenge. Don't try and overdo it, and just see how that actually starts as a Kickstarter for shaping the kind of home life culture that we want to have. And of course, finding things for young people to do that gives them a sense of feeling alive and healthy, feeling good in themselves. And that could look like swimming, it could look like dancing, it could look like art, music, fixing cars, like whatever it is that kind of gets them involved in a tactile experience of themselves in the world. I'm all about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's good. That's good stuff.
I just thought, I'm conscious of time for you, so I'll just ask you one last question, which I think I quite like to end our podcast with this question, and that's specifically for you working with younger people, but also, so if you could give one message or a message to any young people listening, or perhaps like a reflection that, you know, you would have liked someone to share with you when you were younger, what would that message be?
For me, I want to remind that young person, or perhaps this is the parent or carer of a young person, to pass on this message, and to remind ourselves, like, they are not who the global porn industry and social media companies say they are, that they have infinite, untapped character, gifts, talents, abilities that we welcome, that we want to celebrate, that look good on them, that are there for them to express in the world, and that I'm really sorry about how these trillion-dollar companies have harmed them. And I'm sorry if that's affected how they see themselves, how they see their relationships and their place in the world. But that isn't their fault. And that they have so much to offer this world, and that I hope they can recognize that there is so much in them that is of value and would be wonderful to see expressed both in themselves but in their relationships, and for them to think of what life would be like. And no doubt they're already demonstrating much of this, to be the type of kind, caring, loving, courageous, respectful human that is going to make the world a better place. But when they go to sleep at night, they can feel proud of who they are and who they're becoming.
That's really lovely. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you so much for your time today. I think that's a nice place for us to wrap up this podcast. It's been really great to chat with you. And I know, of course, Tim echoed that sentiment as well. I think it's been a great discussion, and it was great having all three of us here too.
I'm so glad. Yeah. Likewise. Well, thank you for the privilege. Yeah,
thank you for sharing your insights with us. I think, like Tim said also, we both got so much out of it, and I'm sure that our listeners will too. And just for anyone listening, where can they find you in the work that you're doing?
Sure, they can get in touch with me at danielprincipe.com.au or get in touch with me on Instagram at Last of the Romans.
Fantastic. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before we sign off, we wanted to ask you for your help. Because we talk about sex, we keep getting shadow banned across a lot of social media platforms. And this not only makes it hard for us to be found, but it says that sex is not okay to talk about. Not only is sex okay to talk about, it's totally essential, because more knowledge equals better outcomes across a whole bunch of measures for all of us. You can make a difference, and the thing that we need from you is your active support. So please follow the podcast and sign up to our socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whichever you like. You can find us over on sexandspace.com and click on our social links from there. Help us make sex an okay space. Thank you for taking this Sex and Space trip with us. Until next time, safe travels, and we'll see you on the next intergalactic episode.